Jax is the executive director of the Foundation for an Informed Texas. She has been the executive director for Texas Normal since 2015. She started participating in libertarian conventions since in 2006. She's on the steering committee for Texans for Accountable Government. And she has served on the executive committee for the Libertarian Party of Travis County. So everyone, please give a round of applause and welcome Jax Finkel.
Happy mid-morning, everyone. How are y'all? Good, awesome. It's good to see you guys. It's a little bit gray out, so I'm happy to have y'all here. And we actually, look at this view. What is it? That's amazing. So I'm going to be talking about marijuana. So first, I want to get a gauge of the room. If you don't mind a little bit of interaction, I'd like you to raise your hand if you believe that people should be jailed for possession of a plant. Ooh, I love it. Nobody here enforcing some status values. All right. So raise your hand if you think that people should have access to cannabis, also known as marijuana, for medical purposes. That's almost everybody. All right. And how about if you think that any human should put anything in their body, including marijuana, that they like? How many of that in line with about 2/3? Okay. Actually, more than 2/3. I'd say about 3/4. Good. Well, that's some liberty-loving people, and I appreciate that. What we're going to talk about today is what's the current laws in Texas, how do we change the law, and a little bit about the propositions and bills that will be before us. So let me make sure I can use this right. Is there a laser on this for pointing? There is. Is it this red button? Ooh. Okay, so some of my pictures didn't show up, and I don't know what happened with that, but FYI, there's a couple missing pictures. But up here in the right-hand corner, you're going to see Governor Abbott, and he is signing into law a very limited medical program that serves people with intractable epilepsy. And he signed it into law with legislators, patients, and caregivers present. So we will be discussing that for sure. What was down here was a picture of people lobbying and advocating up at the Capitol. It was Senator Kurt Watson in the middle and about 25 of his constituents that came to visit him because we put on a lobby day. And I will discuss that a little bit. Down here in the lower left-hand corner is a picture from our medical marijuana hearing this last session. The people standing up are mothers advocating for their children, and they're with a group called Mothers Advocating for Medical Marijuana for Autism. And what they were doing here is really taking advantage of the hearing setting. You're very limited in the amount of time that you can spend, and sometimes you could drag a hearing on for hours. So what they did was a show of force. They had their founder make a statement, and then all the mothers in the room stood up with pictures of their children that needed access to the plant. So it was a very powerful statement and movement. There also was a picture up here of a press conference with our veterans at the Capitol asking the governor to give them access for their service-related injuries. And we also dropped off 1,400 signed letters to the governor making that same request, all from veterans. So there's 1,400 veterans engaging in that. So very, very many different things that are going on. It's very exciting what's happening, but we have to know how to engage in the system. That was about me. He already talked about me. That's me. Moving on. Okay, so why is activism so important in Texas? Texas likes to say that they believe in small government. I don't always necessarily think that that's true. In 1997, you were able to have ballot initiatives at the statewide level that pertain to drug law. And there was one such ballot initiative, or actually a local ballot initiative in San Marcos. And it was going to have medical marijuana program for those that live in San Marcos. It was really popular, and it looked like it was going to pass. There was a lot of support and positive media coverage. And then a group of activists, advocates, decided that they were going to publicly consume on the courthouse steps, or maybe it was City Hall. And they all got arrested, unfortunately. And this made for some bad publicity, and it kind of turned the opinion away from people believing that it would be medical marijuana to people being scared of the devil weed. And it was an unfortunate turn of events, and because of that, because of the timing of the election being during a break for the college people, and because of the bad publicity surrounding the arrests, it didn't pass. But guess what else it did? It alerted the people up in Austin, or here in Austin, that there is a way to change the drug laws locally. And they said, no, we are not going to let that happen. We are in control of that. And they took away the ability to have a ballot initiative at the statewide level to change the law, and at the local level as well, and that's HB 2231 in 1997. And so that really kind of screwed the pooch for us, if you will. Didn't work out very well. It made it a lot more difficult for us, because now in Texas, you can't just collect signatures to get something on the ballot and have the people vote for it. That's not an option. What you have to do in Texas now is you have to go through all of our legislators, and you have to get them to author the bills and them to shepherd it through the session and have the governor sign off on it, and then their regulatory boards take care and make all of the regulations. So it's really kind of created an issue for us here in Texas on changing laws. And so that's why the things that I'm going to be discussing are super important, because we have a harder road to till than the other states that have had medical marijuana and recreational adult use passing and implemented. Okay, so who in here is a political junkie? Okay, all right. I mean, you're here on Saturday for a Liberty Convention. I'm pretty sure you all should have raised your hands, but that's okay. I'm going to go at kind of a high level, if you will, about the political cycle. Because the way it works in Texas is we have a 2-year cycle. You go through the political election cycle, and then 6 days later, you start filing bills up at the Capitol as legislators. So, as you guys know, in December, everybody had to file for their candidacy if they wanted to run. Currently, we are in early voting, and it will be early voting until March 2nd. But let me clarify something for you. That's for the two major parties, Republicans and Democrats. And once you vote in a primary, you are aligning yourself with that political party for the year. Now, you don't have to vote for them necessarily in the general election, but it means if you vote as a Republican that you cannot participate in the Libertarian convention process. So just to be really clear, in Texas, they delineate between the two major parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, and then other parties like the Libertarians or the Greens. So if you are a Libertarian, do not vote on these days. If you know people who are Republicans and Democrats, and you want to help them engage in their political convention process, those would be the dates that they need to participate on. And then March 6th would be the major election day. And for the major political parties, their primary elections are actually, their primary convention is actually right after the election day. So it's very different from the Libertarian, where you have the precinct, then you have the county, and then you have the state. I think I'm missing one in there, district, Senate district. There will be candidate runoff elections, probably for about 5 different races in Texas. And then during the summer, all of the political parties will be holding their state conventions. These are really important because this is where the mission statement, essentially, of the party is being crafted and approved. It's called the platform. And the platform is basically a list of principles that the party holds to be true or actions that they want to take. And a platform is built of different planks. And so, of course, libertarians, they're like in the drug war, stop. But in the other political parties, you have the Democrats who believe in decriminalization and retail adult use. And then we actually had quite a significant movement with the Republican Party, where they actually have a plank 165, which directs Republican legislators to support any bills that would expand access for patients through the limited program that we have. So that's a direct directive. And we're hoping through the convention cycle for the Republicans, there's quite a lot of active Republican groups like Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition that are pushing to have even more planks put forth. Because essentially platform planks are how you craft your messaging, and it's also how maybe the state party is going to respond to different questions that they have proposed to them from the media. So for example, if someone reaches out to our state chair, he's going to be able to look at our platform plank having to do with cannabis, or in our case, the drug war, and be able to share that we don't think anyone should be able to be criminalized with that, right? So this is very important because it's a standard to which you can start holding your legislators to, especially when they're elected. Okay, so then we move into general election. You have to register to vote by October 9th. Raise your hand if you're registered to vote in this room. Oh, is that like only 2 people that aren't registered to vote? Good job, you guys. All right, and then there's early voting. Elections are going to be on November 6th. And then 6 days later, legislators start pre-filing bills. So they jump right into it. But the legislative session doesn't start till January. I also, before I move on to the next slide, I want to take the opportunity to talk about a voter guide. I also work for Texas Normal, and in 2012, I created the Marijuana Policy Voting Guide for Texas, because a lot of people were reaching out to us and wanting to know, where do these people stand? Where are the policymakers' positions? Because there's not a voting record I can go check, right? Because there wasn't a lot of bills at that time. So we created the survey to try to bring that education out to the masses. And we've been able to build it up with our coalition, Texans for Responsible Marijuana Policy. And we have a primary and a general election version that we put out. Now, unfortunately, because of the timing that I spoke about with the 2 major parties and then, or the major parties and then Libertarian, Green, et cetera, it only has Democrats and Republicans for the primary, because they are the only ones who have solidified and locked in who their candidates are going to be for those positions. So, but in general election, every single party will be reached out to, and you will be able to look in on that. But kind of as a standard, if you're a libertarian, you kind of believe in freeing marijuana from regulation. So pretty much that's how it's going to be. All right, moving on. The legislative cycle. And that's the simplified version. It is a gauntlet. They meet every 2 years. So as soon as they're elected, they're pre-filing bills. And then in January, they're going up and they're starting the session. Session only happens every 2 years, and it's 140 days, unless there's a special session that is called. So it's a pretty quick process. And what I'm going to do is just give kind of a high-level overview of how does a bill become a law in Texas? Complicated and difficult process. And there are about 6,000 to 10,000 bills that are filed every session. So biannually, they try to impose almost 10,000 more bills or laws in our life. Typically, only a couple hundred make it through the process and are signed into law. I would also point out that very few of these bills are actually striking statute. So this is creating, in many cases, more statute. So your legislator, your benevolent legislator, authors a bill that is on a topic you support, marijuana, close to your heart, and it is introduced and filed. So to clarify, at any point in what I'm about to explain, if your bill doesn't move to the next portion, it's dead, right? So at this point, it would be assigned to a committee. If it's not assigned to a committee, it's dead, right? The committee usually depends on the topic of the bill. So for example, if you've got a bill removing criminal penalty, it's probably going to go to criminal jurisprudence. If you have a bill regarding medical cannabis, it's probably going to public health. Okay? If you've got something about hemp, industrial or research hemp, then it's going to go to agriculture. So there's all these different committees, and they assign it to the appropriate committee. Once it's assigned to the committee, it's up to the committee chairman to put it on the agenda. Just the committee chairman gets to decide what is on the agenda. Now, of course, you know they listen to their esteemed colleagues, but ultimately it's the chair's decision. So let's assume our bill, because it's awesome, gets put on the chair's agenda for a committee hearing. They will give you, depending on which time of the session, which part of the session you're in, several days' notice on when the hearing will be. And the hearing will be a block of bills. And your bill will be heard in its order. And it will be open to public testimony. You can speak for up to 3 minutes, depending on, sometimes they change it to 2 minutes. But also, you guys all probably live in the Austin area. You can just drive up to the Capitol and log in and sign your support of the bill and leave, and that's it. It takes half an hour, and you can actually have a huge impact, because the fact of the matter is, on most of these hearings, you maybe get a dozen people coming to talk about it. I mean, except for the really highly publicized ones. Most of these hundreds of bills passing are just, a dozen lobbyists, maybe a couple people from the community, coming to talk about this. So it's important to make sure that when they look at the witness list, even if you didn't testify, they see that you signed in support, right? And it gives more tallies in support or in opposition, depending on what we're talking about. So a common misconception is that once a hearing is held, that they're going to immediately vote on that bill. And that's actually not the case. What they do is they typically hold a vote every 7 to 10 days, especially in the beginning of the session. They might hold votes more often as it gets closer to the end of being able to get bills through the committee process, because there are many deadlines that can kill a bill at any moment because of time. So they will vote on it at some point in the future with a whole slate of bills, and let's say that it passes out of that committee. It then goes to what I like to call, the guardian of the House floor, the Calendars Committee. The Calendars Committee is what I would call semi-transparent. They don't necessarily vote up and down. They say, this is our slate of bills, and we all approve it. There's a lot of stuff that happens behind closed doors, and Chairman Hunter does take great pride in the fact that he will help give his fellow legislators some cover if they need it. So it goes to calendar, and the committee decides if it's heard on the agenda of the House floor. Let's assume it moves forward. It's read 3 times. They have discussion and debate on it, and they hold a vote. If it passes out of the House, then it goes through a truncated version of that in the Senate. The Senate runs very much the same, but there's 150 representatives in the House, and then there's 30 senators in the Senate, right? Of which one is the lieutenant governor, who's arguably the most powerful politician in Texas politics, more powerful than the governor. So let's say that it goes through the Senate too, and they love it. They all vote for it, move it along. Then it goes to the governor's desk. And the governor has several options on what he can do about a bill. So, 1, he can sign a ceremony or have a signing ceremony like he did for the Texas Compassionate Use Program. He can veto it, which can actually be undone. If a bill originally passed with a supermajority, it is unvetoable. If the governor vetoes a bill that the legislators are like, no, you didn't. You did not just do that. Then they can hold another vote and get a supermajority in both sides of the House and the Senate and tell the governor, sorry, I don't think so, not today. So there is a way to get around a veto. He can also choose to ignore the bill into law. So if the bill comes to his desk and he doesn't sign it or veto it, it will turn into law at the statutory date that's written into the bill. So that was the easy version of how to turn a bill into a law in Texas. It's actually quite a bit more complicated at each and every step, but that gives you a good idea of the gauntlet that you have to go through to shepherd a bill if you believe it is quality. All right, so let's talk about current law in Texas. I'm going to get to this slide in a second. Who thinks that You can legally carry cannabis in Texas. Oh, you're smart. You know that you can't do that. It is illegal. A lot of people are confused because there are deprioritization programs in a lot of cities. And so I find in the general public a lot that they are confused with the fact that Houston has decided to do a pretrial diversion, meaning that it's decriminalized, we're good, we're done. Not the case. Actually, what that does is it gives us a patchwork of law across the state, which kind of can become an issue if you travel at all. You know, I live in Williamson County. However, if I lived in Travis County, I could participate in the cite and release program. But if I'm arrested in Travis County and I'm from Williamson County, I don't qualify, right? So even in these programs that are actually they're meant to reduce taxpayer burden. They're meant to try to help reduce harm with whatever bandwidth those people have discretionarily, but they don't change the law. So the fact of the matter is, in Texas, if you are arrested with cannabis flower, and I'm talking 4 ounces and under, you can face up to 180 days in jail and a $2,000 fine. You are saddled with a criminal history that will follow you your whole life and can affect your ability to get grants for school, what kind of employment you can have, what kind of place you can live in, and it is a way to saddle someone forever and ever for possessing a plant. And I also want to clarify a little difference between flower and what's known as concentrates. Concentrates are typically used a little bit more by patients. It doesn't require smoking. You can usually take a tincture, a salve, eat an edible, take they call them dabs, which is like a concentrated form of the cannabis plant, extracts and oils. That's delicious. But that's a first-degree state jail felony for like 1 drop of it on your person. Yeah. So guess what, patients? Screw you. You get a felony, right? So those are completely ridiculous laws. And the fact of the matter was, back in 1973 or 1971, Keith Stroup of National Normal came down to Texas because there were 13 people serving life in prison for possession of a plant. 13 people. What? So he came down and got some local advocates really excited about changing the law, and they founded Texas Normal. And in the 73 session, they were able to remove all of those lifetime penalties for possession of a plant, and they were actually able to get us to the bill that we have now. So back in 1973, it was progressive. We went from like the worst to the best. But guess what? 2018, not good enough. Right? That's too many years without change. So let's talk about the one thing that has changed. And it's very narrow, and it's very tiny, and it's what people like to call the camel's nose under the tent, the toe in the door. It's how we're going to blow it up. All right, so Texas Compassionate Use Program was authored by Republicans, passed 30-1 out of the Senate, passed by a supermajority in the House, therefore making it unvetoable, hence why the governor decided to have a signing ceremony. Got to make yourself look good, right? You know? And what this program does is it allows for low THC cannabis for patients that suffer from intractable epilepsy. What is low THC cannabis? First of all, it's a way to pigeonhole a doctor into what he can prescribe to a patient, and it does not offer medical freedom. But let me tell you what it is statutorily. Statutorily, it means that you have 0.5 or less percentage of THC, which is, I'm going to go real kind of high level here, kind of the more pain-relieving psychoactive cannabinoid of the plant. And you have to have at least 10% of CBD, which is kind of more of a neuroprotectant, anti-inflammatory, not really known for its psychoactive effects. You don't get euphoric off of it. And it is currently being allowed in oil only. If you look at the statute, I think there's room for that, but it's mostly serving children patients right now, so oil is actually really the easiest way to kind of give it to them. And it's only for intractable epilepsy. So if you have epilepsy, not sick enough, you have to have intractable epilepsy, right? And if you're any other patient who uses cannabis, also, you're not sick enough. And I'm saying that very sarcastically because that is how they look at it. That you have to be like dying to be able to use a plant to help your body. So, if you want to get a prescription for this, it actually requires 2 doctors, specialty doctors, to give you a prescription. There is a compassionate use registry for patient or for physicians, and they register through there and have someone second the registration through or the recommendation through there, and then it's sent to one of the current 3 licensees. So originally DPS was I'm going to say something I don't normally say. DPS was putting out reasonable regulations at first. They had their, licensing fees in line with many other states, and it wasn't just ridiculous oversight and regulation. And then the governor, and you can look back, and DPS actually says at the point when it changes, we didn't do this, you need to talk to the governor. The governor said, no, a license should be $1 million. I'm not kidding. He said that. Tried to change it. There was a lot of pushback from patients and business people who were like, get out of town with that. That is a 20,000% increase and an unreasonable license. I mean, don't even get me started. So anyway, so now it's only $500,000 every 2 years, you guys. Still really expensive. How is anyone going to make a profit on that? You know it's going to be cycled down to the patients. I'm not going to tangent. I'm going to get it back together, you guys. So these 3 licensees have been growing cannabis in Texas. And here in Austin, down south in Manchaca, there is a compassionate cultivation. I was able to go to their grand opening, and I've been to dispensaries in Colorado, so it was really nice to walk into a dispensary down in South Austin, and it smelled like marijuana, and it was amazing. And one of my good friends was the first patient, or the first caregiver to purchase oil there, and I was also there whenever the first patient purchased his oil, and also took his first treatment there. So people with intractable epilepsy need THC. There is some concern that by forcing a limitation that it may not help everyone, and in fact sometimes we see negative effects with CBD, high CBD treatment, because the THC is needed to calm some of the misfirings in the brain that's happening. So I'm really hoping that the few people that qualify for this are going to really benefit. There's currently, I want to say, 20 plus doctors that are registered to service patients across the state. At first, there was vast swaths of Texas that had no one nearby to service, and it's getting a lot better. And there are patients that are registering and getting their medicine. But 3 dispensaries, what if you live in Amarillo? How do you get that? Do you drive? Do you now have that added expense? So these are all things that we're going to have to really think about coming up into 2019 so that we can make sure that this is not a program that limits medical freedom, but actually allows more patients more access. Let's see, did I forget anything? Guess who's in charge of medicine? DPS, Department of Public Safety. So the only way that that makes sense is they actually do oversee all of the prescription databases. So I understand that, but I really feel like a Health and Human Services would be better oversight as opposed to the police. That's not, hey, you've traumatized patients by arresting them for years. How about now you're in charge of their medicine? Sounds great. Oh, did I go the wrong way? No, this is the right way. Okay, so there are lots of bills that were authored last session. I want to say there was about 17. So Foundation for an Informed Texas as a C3, we do not talk about bill numbers or advocate for bills, but Texas Normal does. So you can actually go on the Texas Normal website. That's where you'll find the voter guide information. And that's where you'll also find bill information from last session. We try to always include every bill in relationship to marijuana, even if there are a select number of bills that are our focus. So that way, if you have a slightly different focus than us, then you have the education and the tools to go do what you need to do. But we, triage our efforts on where we think we can make the most ground based on feedback from legislators and past occurrences. So we're going to talk about how have bills progressed. So starting in 1997, former Representative Elliot Neistat and he's from Austin, started introducing a bill called an affirmative defense bill, which would allow for patients to use medical necessity as a defense if they were arrested, which was important, but not pushing it, but maintaining a conversation about it, right? Which, when you're talking back in 1997, that was a big deal here. Also, we had Representative Harold Dutton out of Houston trying to reduce the criminal penalty, not remove it, but reduce the criminal penalty for possession of, like an eighth or something, So again, not these big, bold bills, but maintaining a conversation. And these legislators stalwartly introduced these bills every single session. And they were the only two bills until 2015. And in 2015, we started getting something that was a little bit better. So let's talk about civil penalties. Did you know in Texas that everything is some kind of criminal penalty? Some kind of criminal charge? There is no civil penalty structure in Texas. If you get a ticket for failure to indicate, you have committed a crime. Did you know that? So this bill would have made it where 1 ounce or less would not have been a crime in any manner. It would have created a civil penalty or a fine that was assessed. So it would have meant that 1 ounce or less originally would have been a $100 fine. And that bill in 2015 made it through the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee with a vote of 4-2. 207 Texans signed up in support for that bill. That's huge. Remember earlier I was saying you might get a dozen? 207? That's a lot. I'm still amazed. And then there were 17 people that spoke against. All sheriffs, all LEOs, all people who were working on parole, probation, things like this. People invested in this system. I'm not going to get into civil asset forfeiture, okay? But if you don't know what it is, it makes up 60% of some of our department's funding, and it is atrocious that no charge has to actually even, you don't have to be found guilty. In fact, I don't even know if you have to be charged. They just file a, what is the term I'm looking for, Kathy? What do they file? It's a charge against your vehicle. That's what it is. So you'll see things that's like, the state against floor exploiter, license plate number XYZW123. What? Anyway, not going to tangent on that. So it made it to the calendars committee, and Representative Hunter had promised to us that it would be put onto the agenda, and it didn't happen. So we don't like that. We're against that. However, in 2017, the bill now had 40 co-authors, and there was a slight change in the bill. They found that it was not a cost-neutral program at $100. In order to be cost-neutral, they actually needed it to be $250. I'm like, why do we need to have it be a cost at all? Let's just not criminalize for it. But we're making progress, right? We're at least having a conversation that you shouldn't be a criminal and that you can be a good person and smoke marijuana. But so 40 co-authors, and it did have a hearing, and it passed again out of the committee, and it was actually assigned to the agenda on the House floor. For the first time since 1973, there was a bill to be heard about changing the laws here in Texas. And then I don't know if you recall, but we ended up with a special session this last year, and it was because, depending on what side you're on, you might say it was deleterious efforts to kill bills, or you might say it was smart maneuvering through the legislative process to kill bills. Depends what your position is. But essentially, 280-ish bills that were set to be heard were killed because of these efforts, ours included. And the big bill that made it where we had to have a special session was the sunset bill for the Health and Human Services, the whole organization. It would have sunset everything and programs would have been cut off. So that's why they ended up having the special session. And on a side note, when it comes to a special session, only the governor gets to choose that agenda. So when he laid out his 19 items and ours was not included, we had to try to find a way to maneuver our way in. We found a couple ways, and some really valiant legislators tried to get it in, but they wouldn't find it germane, so that was unfortunate, and it did die because of that. But I have really high hopes because Hunter actually held his promise this time. It was scheduled on the floor. It had 40 co-authors on it, and you need 75 to get it out of the House. So we can do that. We can definitely do that. Then let's talk about a comprehensive medical program. So the program I talked about, the Texas Compassionate Use Program, it's unreasonably restrictive. When it was introduced, this bill was also introduced, and it would allow for whole plant medicine for patients to be given at the direction of their doctor. That meant real medical freedom for these patients to use and try whatever cannabinoids, terpene profiles that they needed. It also would allow for a pretty extensive list of qualifying conditions, as well as a way to add qualifying conditions that didn't involve going through the legislature. It would have allowed doctors and medical professionals to sit on a board twice a year and decide, what other conditions should be added. Because the fact of the matter is, it's medicine for a lot of conditions. There's a lot of rare conditions. There's no way you can enumerate every reason people should be able to use this plant. Hence why we should just make it legal. So it also allowed patients to have up 2.5 ounces of marijuana. Originally, it also had home grow in it. Unfortunately, that was something that the legislators did not support at the time. It's something I support, and you know that my family would love to have it growing like some jalapenos up in our backyard, like David Simpson likes to say. So that's the end game goal, but this was the bill that got a lot of people signed on to it. So the first time around in 2015, there was a really passionate hearing that went on until about 2 or 3 in the morning. Representative Myra Crownover at the time was the chairperson of the Health Committee. She's not anymore, thank goodness. She didn't run for re-election. Whew. Anyways, she wouldn't even put it up for a vote. That lady was cold-hearted, and that was very disappointing. She even kind of did this little switcheroo. Bills of the same topic are supposed to be heard at the same time, but she took the Texas Compassionate Use Program and moved it to the front so that none of the patients could come and testify because they wouldn't be there. What? Glad she's gone. But in 2017, it had bipartisan authorship, and after the hearing that you saw the picture of in the beginning, there was an overwhelming surge of support with 70-plus legislators signing on in 36 hours. I need a sip of my coffee. I've been talking too long, sorry. Caffeinate. All right. So that's huge. Ultimately, there were 79 authors to this bill. That already gets it out of the House. Just the authors votes it out of the House. I bet that we can get a supermajority by next session. Let's make it unvetoable, right? So 30 of the authors were Republicans, and there are 4 doctors in the House, and 3 of them signed on to the bill. Also, I'm going to tell you a random bit of knowledge. Most of the legislators are either lawyers or businessmen. There are very few doctors, educators. There's not really a spectrum of representation of different types of people up there. So FYI. And originally, the chairman, I love this story because it's power to the people real quick. So the Chairman Ford Price out of Amarillo, was like, He didn't want to put it up for a hearing in the first place, but there was so much pressure on him, and we kept holding press conferences at the front steps with patients and doctors, that it put a lot of pressure on him, and he kind of had to hold a hearing. So, he held the hearing as close to the deadline as he could, right? I mean, I'm not saying he did that on purpose. That's me surmising, so just to clarify. But we do know that once he held the hearing, he knew he had very little time to get a vote on it. And he was not moving on a vote. I think he had like 5 business days before it was just going to die in committee from not being voted on. And we put on the pressure again and called his office, lit his phones up. I think we generated 10,000 calls in 36 hours or something like that. I mean, it was amazing. Marijuana people in Texas are amazing. Don't piss them off. And so he actually held a hearing. He called a held a vote, excuse me. He called a special meeting to hold the vote, and he voted against it, but he still held the vote. And let me tell you why that's important. One of the lobbyists I work for or with said that he had not seen a chairman put a bill up that he was going to vote no on in 17 years. It doesn't happen. They put a bill up because it's going to look good for them. They're going to vote yes. They're the hero. So I actually want to say to Chairman Price that I appreciate his integrity. I appreciate him letting the will of the people and the vote be taken so that it could pass 8-2 out of the committee. Even though he voted no, he still allowed it to happen. And I don't like being allowed to do anything. I like to just do it because I'm like a free person. But in this situation, it was totally on him to give that to us. And he did, even though he knew it could cause backlash for him by voting no, right? Am I doing okay on time, Steve? Okay, almost ready for Q&A, very close. I do want to see if you guys have any questions. Anyway, so that was awesome. It got voted out, but the paperwork didn't make it to calendars in time to be enrolled, and it died there. But 79 legislators is a lot of legislators. We're going to win big time. Oh, look. Yes, we are ready for questions. All right, so I've got Steve with a microphone. If you have a question about what I've talked about or other potential policy items in Texas, I would be more than happy to answer. If you don't have questions, I'm just going to know I did a good job. Yes, we have a question.
Are there any current bills that are going through?
No. So in Texas, all of the bills die in between session. So when they adjourn for the last day of the legislature, all of those bills die. So there are no bills right now. There's no petition you can sign. The only way that you can engage right now is by engaging with candidates and your elected legislator. The fact of the matter is that your elected state representative and state senator cares a lot more about what you have to say during the election cycle. When you're making your face known by volunteering and helping them out, then they start associating positive things with the cannabis movement. They won't feel like they'll lose their votes, da-da-da-da-da. So right now, the most important thing you can do is volunteer for a campaign, get out and vote for the candidates that support cannabis law reform, and make sure that you are engaging with who your current legislators are so that they know your face before the session. Because when session comes, it's too busy. They don't have time to meet with you. But right now, it's their job to have time to meet with you, right? If you go to a town hall and you ask them a question, now the whole room is exposed to the topic. So it's also on us to be good stewards of the messaging and the issue, and coming and making sure we're putting forward a really professional, put together, whatever you want to call it. And for you?
Yeah, based on your expertise, do you think the best option for the next session is to pursue full legalization or to try and take that baby step for medicinal use?
So what I'm going to say I don't like, and you probably won't like, but legalization will not happen next session. I mean, it would have to happen federally between now and then for it to happen here first. And even then, they might not approve it for the local. So I think really what we have to push is the civil penalties in the medical program. I feel like the medical program could potentially be some low-hanging fruit. that we could do really well with. There have been, however, some bills for legalization, a joint resolution for legalization. So I'm not going to tell you don't advocate for that when the option is there for you, but I am going to tell you that the temperature at the Capitol, listen, they don't even want you to grow your own weed. They don't even want you to smoke it. They want you to have to vaporize it or eat it, right? They want to control how you intake it. So they're not going to just be like, hey, everybody, you want to buy some marijuana? Even though that'd be great, right? Because actually what we see is teen use goes down. You see the black market being taken out, a lot of the violence along with that being reduced, because you have a business that is IDing and making sure that children aren't using it and that you are of age, da-di-da-da-da. So, did that answer your question? Sorry if you didn't like it, though.
Okay, so the question that I have is about the civil penalties, and I was just wondering what is the basically how, because eventually it flips to criminal if there's non-payment or whatever. If you could speak to, or if you know,
Are you talking about the escalation process that they
right?
just
If you
did?
could speak a little bit about that, because
Yes.
that's really important to me.
So there was a nuance added to the bill that I didn't go into when I was talking about it, but you're very right to point it out. And it was that the first time. So originally it was innumerable amount of times you could be fined for possession. But to get some really conservative Republicans on board, there was a committee substitute where they adjusted it where the first time was a fine, the second time was like a fine in a class, the third time was a fine in a longer class, and then I think at the fourth time was when it did go back to being a Class B misdemeanor. I would have to double check that it was the fourth time. I think that it was. I don't like escalating sanctions. It's either wrong or it's not. So I'm not in favor of that, but I am in favor of harm reduction. And if that's what has to happen to like start making some change, I'm willing to work with that while always continuing to push the conversation about why that's not necessary. Does that answer your question?
So the other part of that's yes, I was asking about that, but no, more specifically, I mean, I've been smoking weed my whole life, it seems like, and been around people who do, and I know that a lot of these fines are going to end up being late or being unpaid, and I'm just wondering what happens at the point that it's like, where does it go from there? So
that was actually one of the conversation pieces that they were so worried about, that someone might not pay their fine on time. But it's going to be the same as most other fines. They're going to send you notices and reminders, and if you don't, I believe what it was the fine got larger. So ultimately you might end up paying a crap ton of money. But I did not have the understanding that for non-payment of the fine that you would be warranted. Now maybe on your fourth time, because now you're a criminal B or Class B criminal misdemeanor, I would have to do more research to give you a 100% sure answer of that. I've got some cards on my table right out there if you want to email me, and then we can talk about that. Yeah? What's up?
Hello, Jax.
Hello, how are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Good.
I was wondering if you had any strategy plans for intermediate bills, such as expanding the medical program we already have, or of course you have the big bills you want to go for, but something maybe just to make things a little bit better, where they say, if you're not ready to go the full thing, it's fine.
Right.
Take this intermediate step.
So just to clarify, the comprehensive medical bill, the second time around, was an expansion of TCUP. So it would have taken the current extremely limited program and improved it, right? And made it much more free for patients to use. However, your point is well taken, because you know what? They might not want to let people have more THC. You better watch out. You don't know what to do with your body, do you? So I got to tell you what to do with it, right? So I think that it's reasonable to believe that at a bare minimum, we're going to get an expansion of conditions, right? So we may not get the whole plant aspect. I definitely don't think we're going to get home grow, and I hate to say that. Because for low-income people who may have trouble affording the medicine, growing your own is extremely helpful. And it's actually therapeutic in and of itself if you have PTSD. So The long and the short of it is that that bill will be reintroduced, the committee substitute, and it is an expansion of teacup. However, I would not be surprised if there's a Republican senator or someone or legislator who's like, hey, let's just do the conditions, you know?
We have time for one more question. Who would like to ask?
I answered all the things?
All right.
Awesome. Thank you very much, you guys. I appreciate y'all being here today.